Hey, what's going on? Today I'm going to show you how I took these wood scraps sitting around the shop and turned them into this cutting board here. So stick around and yeah, good to have you. So first I'm going to mark the tops of all these pieces just to kind of keep everything straight in my head as I proceed with the build. Don't have to do this, but it just kind of helps me stay organized and know that I'm putting the right edge on the table saw, that kind of thing. Speaking of which, these inner edges, we're going to have to clean all those up so we can get a nice glue up. The top and bottoms are flat enough for me to get away with going right to the table saw here. I don't have to mill them, luckily, so that'll save a little bit of time. So I'm using this board itself to position the fence, and then I'm actually bringing the fence just a hair closer to the blade after that so that we trim just the edge off like this. I'm going to do that for both pieces, and then I'm going to flip them and then trim the other edge off, and then I'm going to flip them again and trim the first edge one more time because it'll be smoother, because a perfectly flat edge will be riding the fence opposite the blade. So let's go ahead and get all those cut, and then we will move on to the thinner pieces that are going to make up the middle of the cutting board. And if you're wondering, these are actually scraps from a crib that I built for my daughter, so that's why it's kind of some nicer wood than is usually around the shop. I looked at it, and the offcut lengths that I had left just looked to be the perfect size for the large cutting board that I've been wanting to make myself. I got a bunch of nice cutting boards in the kitchen, but I wanted a really big one. So, alright, following the same process, I'm using the piece itself to position the fence, and then moving the fence a hair closer to get just the edge. Now I'm going to go ahead and flip that and run the other edge through. So we'll have two nice surfaces for glue. Alright, let's take those pieces of ash and do the same process with those. New edge, flip, new edge. I had to switch to a thinner push stick for these pieces because I was getting a little close to the blade with that other orange one that I was using earlier. Over at the workbench, I'm going to take my beefy parallel bar clamps and set those up. This is where I'm going to do the glue up. I'm going to use additional clamps, but these are a great start because they give you a nice level surface to work off of. So I'm just lining everything up how I want it to sit. Using those little marks I made for myself earlier to make sure all the tops are facing up. So I'm using Titebond 3 for this glue up. It's supposed to be a little bit better about handling the water that can ruin a cutting board. No wood glue is actually waterproof. This one claims to be, but I can tell you from experience, waterproof is a bit of a stretch. In any case, its water resistance will be appreciated. So I'm getting a good amount of glue on each piece here. Those nice edges that we just cleaned up and made flat. Making sure everything's nice and snug. We shouldn't actually need all that much clamping pressure if we made our cuts right. But we want to see good squeeze out along the length of every seam. That's always a good indication that you've done it right. There's what the Titebond 3 bottle looks like. It's the green one. Alright, so we're going to add some more clamps to this as well, I think, because in looking at the seams here, it looks like I got good squeeze out everywhere except for right about here. So I'm going to try to get more clamping pressure on that spot. Here we go, busting out the other Jorgensen clamps. So I added some clamps to each end, and then I put a pipe clamp right about in that spot that I showed you a minute ago. So let's get this out of the clamps. I left this overnight because I wanted to make sure it was completely cured before I started messing with it with the planer and all that. So you can see we did pretty good here. Got good squeeze out. I'm going to take this flat chisel and knock all this glue off so that it doesn't dull my planer knives. You don't have to do this, but it only takes a moment, so might as well spare the planer blades a little bit. Over at the planer, I'm going to start taking this thicker middle section down to the rest of it. It's going to take quite a number of passes to do, so just keep feeding it through until we get close. Okay, everything's looking a lot smoother than before. I noticed that the knives on the planer were grabbing this end piece a little bit here because of the funny cut that's in it. So I'm going to bring that over to my workbench and I'm just going to trim this up. If I get these long bits too, it'll actually save me a little bit of time. When I go pass after pass through the planer, it's just going to be less length to wait for every time. So let's go ahead and saw all those off, and then what we're going to do is take some finishing passes now. I switched the planer so that it's making more cuts. And I'm just going to try to save myself some time sanding by using that finishing setting on the planer here. Okay, I've got this plane down all the way now, more or less. Now I'm just taking a close look to see how we did with these glue joints. Everything's looking pretty tight. There is one spot toward the middle on only one side where I can see a little bit of a gap, but the rest of the glue up is fantastic, so I think it's going to be stable. My guess at that is just that I don't have a zero clearance plate on my table saw, so the accuracy isn't 100% there, but it's definitely good enough. So I don't have a sliding miter saw, so I'm going to use my Craig miter gauge here to clean up the ends of this. Normally I would use a sliding miter saw for that, but I don't have one. Probably coming soon though. Just setting up for the cut. Here we go, putting a nice clean end on one side. Then we are going to flip and do the other side. But I actually noticed some instability in the wood here, so see those cracks? I'm actually going to nibble a little more off of that end to try to take more of that out. And then we flipped it and did the other side. Alright, got that all trimmed up, but I have some voids that I need to address. I want to keep them because I think they look cool. I'm not sure what these are. Maybe someone can tell me in the comments. I have a feeling it's maybe a sap pocket. Something funny that happens with the sap, but there's another one I gotta fill. So we're gonna use a 2-part resin for that. The first time I squeezed this out, it actually didn't squeeze out evenly, so I didn't want to use that pile of goop. So I used this smaller pile of goop. You want to stir this up for about 30 seconds until it turns silvery. And I like to use epoxy when there's a lot of void to fill. Otherwise, I tend to use super glue. And you'll see I actually end up using super glue later. Because when I went to chisel some of this off, I kind of tore some epoxy out. You'll see that in a minute. Alright, so while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and get my router good to go. I'm putting a 45-degree chamfer bit in here, and I'm using a beefy one too because I don't want any scorch on the workpiece if I'm not fast enough with my hands. So I'm going to put that back in the table, and you'll see right here is where I actually chip out some of the epoxy I just poured in. But it's okay, we'll fill that up with super glue afterwards. Take some time and get the rest of the excess off. So right here I'm going back and adding some super glue to any voids that need just a little bit more material. I'm actually taking the opportunity to work on some cracks that I noticed as well from some more unstable areas. That's what you want to go for though. You want to have excess material that actually makes it proud of the surface there, and then you'll sand down to even afterwards. So this is what the other voids that I just filled look like. Got some cracks that I sealed up with the CA glue. There's that nice sap pocket question mark that I showed you earlier. So now I'm going to take 120 on my random orbit sander, and I'm just going to bring this down to flat so that when I put the router trim on, the board rides perfectly flat on the table. This is not the final sanding. This is just to make everything nice and smooth for when it goes to the router table. Here we are over at the router table. I took the fence off and we're using this bit with a bearing that I showed you earlier, putting a nice 45-degree chamfer on the top and the bottom. I did this in 2 passes, and I actually decided to keep the chamfer pretty shallow because I thought it looked nice. Thought it had a nice, delicate, practical look to it, so, you know, I didn't go too deep with it. So here's what I ended up with. Nice chamfer all the way around. Now it's time to do the finish sanding. So we are already at 120. We're gonna walk this up to 180 and then eventually sand at 220 and maybe 400. I'll see how I'm feeling. 400 is usually just a quick hand sand anyway. So this part is called raising the grain. The reason to do this is to get all the wood fibers to stand up on end. This is just water that I'm hitting the board with real quick. Take a cloth, don't saturate it too bad because you want the board to dry in a good amount of time. And just wipe it down. All the wood fibers are going to raise, they're going to dry in that position, and then we're going to sand them again. And what this means for the end user of the board is that after they wash it for the first time, it's going to remain smooth. It's not going to feel all rough after. So the board's pretty much dry. I'm going to take a piece of 220 on my sanding block and just give the board some corners, make them not so sharp. So real quick, I'm taking 400 grit and giving it a wipe down for that extra smoothness. Here's what we're going to finish with today. Howard's cutting board oil, and I like to use their food grade wax after. I'll show you how I apply that. So now the part we've all been waiting for. There it is, the oil hitting this nice walnut, this nice ash. I'm a big fan. Hopefully you guys like the way this looks too. So not much to know with the oil, really just want to get it on there in excess. You want to plan on letting the board kind of drink it a little bit, maybe reapplying to areas that look dry. Make sure you get that end grain with excess because that's going to slurp this stuff up faster than the rest of the board. See, I just took a minute to do that. Here's the other side, looking just as nice. Love the way that middle piece looks. All right, if you like this video, help us out, toss us a like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. If you already are subscribed, thank you very much for the support. So I'm pumped with how this looks. We're letting this dry, and I am noticing some places where it could probably use a little bit more finish. See in the lower left there, some spots on the board are just going to drink oil a little faster, so we like to hit those again with excess oil. And then we'll wipe off the excess, let it dry, and it'll be ready for the wax. So there we are, just giving it a good wipe down, getting things dry, and now we're going to take the wax. The wax is very spreadable. I never really need to heat this stuff up. It's pretty easy to use. Really, you just want to streak it on there evenly. You want to get the wax on there. It's going to look all streaky. You want to let it tack up just a little bit. The manufacturer actually suggests waiting for an hour. I usually wait for like anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. That's what it's going to look like. Basically streaky, shiny wax all over the board. So once you've done that and it's tacked up a bit, you want to take a perfectly clean rag, ball it up like this, and then you're going to buff in small circles to get a beautiful sheen on the board that you would not get with just the oil finish. This same sheen is going to help repel water, and it's going to make your board last longer before it needs a refinishing. So there we go. After doing that along the whole board, you can see there's this nice patina, this nice shine to it. It's looking great. Thanks for coming along for this journey, everybody who watched, and I hope to see you in the future. Let me know if you like the board in the comments, yeah? Peace.